Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Doom Patrol Season 4, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, we're picking back up with the Doom Patrol. Larry goes off trying to find Key because he's getting visions of Key, who's off with Mr. 104, which we'll circle back to that later. But the Doom Patrol themselves get a visit from Kip, who's like, yo, this Immortus stuff is going down, so he kind of explains everything that's happening to them, which, first and foremost, obviously I love the whole, Rouge and Cliff situation, because she's like, yeah, you kind of went on and on and on about, you know, the sensation thing, and your daddy issues, and your grandfather. He's like, well, I didn't. No, I was kind of going on and on and on. But for Laura, I think hearing about all that stuff kind of, I mean, she has a lot of a guilty conscience already with the Rita stuff. I think she felt even more guilty about the Cliff stuff. I don't think she handled it and worded it the best way, because she made it seem like all you were doing was complaining, so that's why I'm doing this. But it's like, hey, give you a car to kind of focus on. You talked about it before, that working on a car kind of let all the other BS kind of float away. So it's like, yeah, this kind of becomes your pet project. And for him, it's like, this is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me in a very long time. So there's that. Poor Jane was literally trying to get a nut off, and then, like, in the middle of it, she pops up in underground. She's like, I get it. We're not supposed to. At first I was like, why is that such an issue? But it kind of circles all around back to, like, the point she kind of brings later on in the episode, that it's like, it's not her body, so doing anything sexual, that's why she felt guilty about the Shelly thing, because it's like, no, my job first and foremost is to be there for Kay, like, my feelings, whatever, that's all irrelevant. So that's why she kind of felt guilty. But it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I should be thinking about her. I should be focusing on Kay. And the rest of the personalities are like, what the fuck are you talking about? And she's like, what? They're like, we didn't bring you down. You just showed up. And she's like, oh. I think it was like her own guilty conscience, because, like, subconsciously she felt guilty about it. It's like, oh, this isn't my body. She felt shame about it. So it's like, oh, I love that she came down there with, like, her pants unbuttoned and everything. And what were you doing? She's like, nothing. Buttons her pants back up and zip. I was like, oh man, that was probably the first time you're going to, like, I mean, technically, with Shelly, was it last episode or episode before? No, it was the episode before last. You got your nut off, and now it's like, oh, it didn't happen this time. Like, and it was just like, it's like when you try to do it yourself, there was almost like, there's that shame behind it for Jane. And it's like, okay, cool. And she bounces. So I was like, I love that. So, poor Jane. But yeah, Kip explains the whole Immortal thing. It's like, right, do you not realize, like, why you guys haven't ate? Well, not you, Rouge, and not you, Vic, obviously, but Jane, Larry, Cliff, and Rita. Basically, Mr. Nobody had the piece, like, Immortus, there were, like, pieces, and apparently, Mr. Nobody had one. Obviously, he ended up killing, well, also begs the question, well, we know that Dorothy had, well, because she's not immortal, because she's starting to actually age now, so, because we do know she's getting older now, so I guess, like, that immortality, you know, is going and everything, but, Niles ended up taking it from Mr. Nobody, and he wanted to make it so that the whole point was, as we learned, well, season 2, that everything, his experiments were a form of him trying to figure out how to figure out his own mortality, figuring out immortality so he could be around forever for his daughter who wasn't aging. Well, now it's a situation of, like, right, they themselves are the Immortus Project, because apparently Immortus is like this interdimensional deity / goddess, God that wants their immortality back. It's like, hey, you each have a piece of my soul, fragment of what I am. I'm gonna need that shit back. So that's what the whole Janice situation was with Rita back in episode 3. So they're like, huh, what does this like necessarily look like going forward? Like, the whole, you know, does it look like a, you know, does it take the form of you going through your own filmography and an emotional vampire named and it's just like, oh, he was basically like, oh, like, look at the shit you've pawned yourself. I'm like, how is it their fault that they never look for the trouble, they just stumble back asswards into it. Once again, they still believe they've stopped the ass apocalypse, but that's still potentially a thing. Once again, the last remaining ass doesn't seem to be a zombie, but we'll see. Because they're like, no, we averted the end of days, so it's all good. But now it's like, nope. And Rita, which I think it is very profound that the one person it would affect the most would be Rita, because I was about to say, like, Rita has her vanity issues out of anyone, so it feels pertinent that she would be the one that's like so desperate to like not be like to be aging like that she'd find a quick fix around it. Is like rather than talking to the team, because why would she talk to the team about, why would she be asking them for help, considering, hey, you guys backstabbed me by making Rouge the leader. Maybe if Larry was there to keep an, well, because Larry probably would have gotten called to the team meeting but he probably would have been, because it was also like his, when he was with the team, he was like, told Vic, give her a hug for me, you know, and it's like, hey, you find Key, make it back here and you can hug her yourself, because obviously he feels guilty because him and Rita have not been in the best place, obviously, since the whole leadership swap situation. So it's like, yeah, stabbed in the back by our best friend, so. Understandable why Larry probably feels even more guilty, but maybe Larry would have stuck around by Rita's side to be like, hey, we can talk this out. But once again, she made that unilateral decision on her own, ended up dropping the bottle when when Cliff shows up, and now everyone gets younger except for Rouge. They're like, wait, why aren't you getting younger? And she's like, oh yeah, like 101 at the Bureau of Normalcy, don't breathe anything in, like don't breathe, don't choke. And they're like, honestly, that's honestly a really good thing. You know, I was like, honestly, that's a really good thing to kind of consider. But I was like, I would assume that still would probably seep into your pores, but I don't know. Either way, everyone's reverted back to their teenage selves again. So now it's like, right, we gotta. I love that whole bit too about Kip. It's like, well, now that I'm like a fledgling again, actually young chaos magicians have beautiful locks of hair, and he takes his hat off and they're like, wow, you know? But now it's like he can't use his magic because he's a virgin again. So it's like, oh, you got re-virginized. It's like, oh man, that makes me think of because I recently had this conversation about True Blood, because I definitely remember that being a thing with Jess from True Blood, who her hymen kind of regrew every time she lost her virginity because of her vampirism. So it kind of gave me kind of a similar vibe in this case. It's like, because I'm surprised they didn't try to make that a thing, or like, because he's like, oh, I gotta find April. She's the only one that missed April. She's like my mentor. She could be the one that undo everything. And Cliff is like, oh yeah, you want to go there? You want to kind of do your thing? And he's like, no, you idiots. But I'm also like, I thought that probably would have been the fastest solution, was probably get you laid, and that way you get access to your magic. But I guess it probably would still fall under the Jessica rules, just because it's like, right, their whole thing is like, oh, we're not just going to stop at this point in our lives becoming teenagers, like teenage-ish, younger us. It's like, no. We're going to get younger and younger until we basically, as Cliff kind of puts it, and even it's like, oh yeah, we're going to turn back into our respective dad's splooge. So it's a road trip, and obviously Rita's not too keen on going back to like aging up again. Like obviously she's not too keen on the thought of, hey, I'm gonna go back to being nothing, fade into nothingness. But it's still a situation of, she'd probably prefer that, because she's like, oh, it can't be too bad. But it's also like, well, at first she's like, yeah, this April lady will fix everything. It's like, yeah, there's no guarantee. I'd lower your expectations on that. And I guess hearing that from Rouge just bothered her most, which I did like that they had like a heart-to-heart, because we found out that Rouge didn't, like, she actually did get younger. She just used her shape-shifting abilities to hide the fact, is because she didn't want to go back to being who she was. She's like, my teenage years weren't great. People thought about like, oh, the first diss and partying and all that. Like for her, it's like there's always been people, she didn't really get into it too much. There has to be a lot of complication there, but she's like, when people found out what she could do, her powers, she's like, people didn't respond well, especially the people she thought were important to her, that she thought she was important to. They kind of abandoned her. And for her, it's like, whereas people kind of feel like, you know, this hole in their heart, like a stain on their soul type of situation. For her, it feels like a chasm. And being back to being her younger self just makes her feel like there's been such a chasm between me and people for so long. What, you know, and that's why I am the way I am. And she's like, what if all I am now is that chasm, you know? And she like pours her heart out to Rita and apologizes. Because for Rita, it's like, you were my best friend. Like, even when I felt lonely, like, you and the sisterhood, you were there for me, but you in particular, but that's why it hurt so much, because you were my best friend, you know? And you betrayed me, you hurt me, and, you know, for Rouge, it's like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry for what I did to Malcolm, to the sister, to you. I think about it all the time. And when she's breaking down, like, she's losing control of her powers, so she ends up reverting to her teenage stuff, like what she really looks like now. At the same time, the rest of the crew, Jane, Willoughby, Vic, and Cliff went off hanging out with some teenagers. I love that. It's like, oh, you're going to go buy these teenagers some liquor. And I love that Jane's like, hey, Euphoria or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, very befitting, like, timely reference too, which is also interesting too, because it's all under the same umbrella that's being run on HBO Max. Obviously, Euphoria being an HBO show, so it's just very poetic to be able to reference that. What was it that kid said to Cliff? He was like, "Oh, you remind me of my remind me of my racist grandfather, but fresh as fuck." I'm like, I love that. Oh, that's quite the description. My race looked like my racist grandfather, but fresh as fuck. He's like, "Oh, thank you, thank you very much." But yeah, they go off and they party it up, and you know, it's nice. And I bet both of them had very complicated teenage lives. I mean, especially later years for Vic, but also for Jane, because she brings up something interesting where it's like, she never had much of a teenage life because, right, Miranda was the one that was, I mean, we don't know how many, I don't know if we know how many of the personalities were, we might have saw that when we learned about Miranda in season 2. I don't remember, how many of those personalities were around back then. But obviously at that time, Miranda was the primary. So it's like, right, she got to enjoy the teenage years. Me, I didn't come into Kay's life until years down the road. She was already kind of an adult by then. So I never had the, like, teenage experience. Which Cliff was telling her earlier, like, yeah, the fuck-ups of teenagehood kind of make you into what you are. I mean, obviously you learn from your mistakes, but teenage years are when you're supposed to, I mean, obviously there's a limitation to it, but that's when you're supposed to fuck up the most. You know, you learn from your mistakes, you grow. It's like a lot of that kind of makes you who you are. Like, even despite all his fuck-ups and stuff, it's like, yeah, the stuff in his teenage years made him who he is. And I think that's a little bit of, like, where Jane's feeling a little lost, because, once again, she's defined herself so long by her role as a primary, what she does for Kay, that it's like, right, who am I? Like, I am someone who's undefined. I don't have a past. I never had, like, a real life. Like, the experiences at, like, the teenage years, the awkwardness and stuff like that, that was all Miranda who handled all that stuff. Me, I just kind of get the complicated adulthood. I was kind of thrust into this, and now I'm, you know, been on an existential journey. I mean, Jane's entire journey has always been very existential. I mean, everyone's journey in this series has always been existential. But, she's got so high that she ends up talking to Kay, and she's like, right, I'm so sorry, this body is not mine, it's yours, I shouldn't be doing whatever I want with it. But Kay's like, it's our body. So she's like, and I wonder if she's saying that just because she's the primary, or she's trying to say, like, you know, because how do you, I guess the primary always has, like, a very interesting role in comparison to all the other personalities. So do the other personalities ever get to have their own lives? Because it seems like Jane gets to live that up, you know, instead of, you know, for Kay. But it's like, what about the other personalities? Once again, everyone has their roles. So now Jane is becoming a person all her own. So it begs the question, will eventually all of the personalities leave that body, and when they all split to become their own individual people? Or is that just Jane's journey? Because it seems like it is, but maybe when Jane figures it out, maybe Kay will figure it out, and they all won't be needed anymore. So maybe it'll come down to, like, all the other personalities will disappear and go back to Kay, whereas her and Jane will split and become their own individuals. Maybe? I don't know. I did think that was a beautiful moment. I mean, especially when, like, the color started flashing and, like, a tear started going down Jane's eye. I mean, especially because she, face, no, not down her eye. Well, you get what I'm trying to say. She did give Vic advice, because for Vic, it's like, yeah, like, his best friends from middle school, he was hoping, like, meeting up with them, but it's like, right, we can't go back in time. All that time is gone, and he wished he had done things differently. But she gave him that advice of, like, right, this superhero shit, there's always going to be something on the horizon. So, like, while we're out rescuing other people, like, who's going to rescue us? So, like, take some time out for you, which Vic does. He goes, tracks down his friend, but by the time he gets there, he's, like, even younger as a teenager. So it's like, whoa, Vic? He's like, yeah, it's me. It's like, that's fucking weird. Seeing like one of your best friends like it's a teenage, like a kid again, that's weird. But everyone's partying it up, and obviously Willoughby and Jane get even younger, and they run into Cliff, and Cliff kind of like pushes him away, and Jane's like, what the fuck, like what kind of friend would do? He's like, friends? You mean the actual friends who only want me to punch shit, who never bother to ask if I'm actually okay when in actuality I'm not? Because even the whole thing with, because the only person who knows about kind of what he's going through is because she overheard it is Rouge. But even Rouge kind of like I said, our comment making it seem like, oh, all you're doing is complaining. He's like, oh. But still, he appreciate it, but I'm wondering, does that still strike a chord where it's like, I'm not okay after everything? Like, the first sensation I felt in years was me squishing someone's brains. It was me killing a zombie, yeah, but still, that was going to be my first touch. Now I have to wear this mitt because I don't want anything else to be the thing I touch. I want to focus on, like, holding my grandchild, having my daughter's hand in my hand. I want those to be the feelings I have, not let the current last sensation I have is the feeling of squishing a brain in a skull. You know, it's like, yeah, he's kind of fucked up. And that's the thing. He's like so busy being there for other people sometimes. It's like, yeah, because I think sometimes it's easier to be there for other people rather than focusing your own shit. Which, I mean, that always ends up being the problem with the Doom Patrol. They're so caught up in their own stuff that sometimes they're not there for each other. And so Jane's going through her stuff that it never crossed her mind to really think like, oh, Cliff is really kind of going through stuff, you know? He's not the most open person a lot of times about that stuff, so he just wants to go party up because partying allows him to just kind of forget about everything he's dealing with, you know? Hey, like, fuck the responsibility, let's party on, let's get drunk, especially becoming a teenager, it's just going to make that even more, and especially because it's like time is rewinding, I've still got my mind and my brain, I'm still dealing with everything I'm dealing with, but now I'm in my teenage body to some extent, even though I'm still like in the robot body, but it's like, I'm a teenager now, so I'm a drown shit out the way I did as a teenager, you know? I'm gonna use my teenage vices and ability, you know, to kind of like want to go back in time to feel that way again, fine and great, and not have to worry about all this other bullshit. But then obviously Willoughby and Kip and Jane are going to try and deal with this on their own. But then like the group he's a part of show up, and was it Bunby, the bunny? And he's kind of making it seem like, right, you better fall in line, and there's no bargaining. And he returns Kip to normal. But he took something from Jane, which I'm wondering, was that supposed to be like her immortality? Is that what he's doing? Is this going to be like their attempt to draw Immortus back? Like, I'm wondering what that is. Like, what did he take from Jane? Is it something related to Kay, her other personalities, her powers, or something? Because he's almost like, yeah, there's no bargaining, so he returned Kip to normal and like restored his magic, but what did he take in the process? And he was even saying like, right, just stop screwing around, just take what you're going to take. And he took something from Jane, and the question is, what exactly? So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where that takes us. Then there's the whole situation with Vic, who runs into, well, not Vic, Larry, who runs into Mr. 104, and because of Keeg, he ends up seeing what Mr. 104, Rama, what he went through, and then eventually, like, it flips on the other side, because Mr. 104, Rama's like, I can't get rid of this thing, like, I'm trying to, but Keeg stays, and now we see, like, from the vision of the past, like, obviously Larry's killing people just like Mr. 104 was forced to. That was pretty crazy. Like, basically he turned the air in a room into water. Like, he's able to, you know, shift the properties of stuff, kind of like the elements and stuff. So he was able to turn all the oxygen in that room into water, and ended up, like, killing everyone in the room. And obviously Larry with his radiation, but Mr. 104, he's like, yeah, I can turn my body into iron. And so, which I don't know if I brought that up last episode. He kind of reminds me, well, I guess like, what was the dude's name? The mineral dinosaur dude. I'm blanking on his name now off the top of my head. That guy, him and a little bit of 104 kind of reminds me of Kevin 11 from, Ben 10. His whole thing is like he absorbs properties and makes him body. Yeah, it's kind of like that, where it's like, hey, my body's made out of iron, so your radiation doesn't affect me. Which I was like, is this what Keeg wanted? Because Larry's isolated himself so much from people because he can't contact with people, but he's met I don't know why I said that like that. He met someone whose powers are able to help them like protect themselves from Larry's radiation, so he could actually have a contact with this person directly outside of just like the Doom. So I was almost like, are they setting up Larry kind of having someone in his life that, you know, because he hasn't had like outside of Key, and that's I think the point. I think that's what older Keek told young Keek. It's like, right, don't just be his everything. Which I talk about that time and time again. It's a different dynamic, but that's a lesson I learned when it came to my love life, like not to make someone your everything. I bring it up all the time and time again, because it's a very important lesson. Like when you kind of like make someone your everything when they're not around, and Larry kind of uses like Key as like you are my everything, I'm gonna hold on to you tight instead of living my life. I don't need anything else because I have you. That's something that kind of got brought up in the first episode, that codependency. And it's like, right, someone being important to you is never a bad thing, but don't make them everything. Like live your life, experience it. And I think that's what Key wanted him to do now that he met someone who has powers like him. It's like, right, who's also someone who's been through what he went through. Because yeah, the others, I think Cliff got caught by the Bureau of Normalcy for a little bit, but no one has the experience like Larry does. Larry has a very unique experience, and we find out, obviously, it's like, well, obviously, Rita has her circumstances because of the Sisterhood of Dada and, like, you know, time traveling, but when it comes to everything that they went through, Larry and 104 have very similar circumstances. Their powers constantly being used to kill people over and over again. And because of his abilities, Mr. 104, like eventually it's becoming harder and harder to control his powers, and eventually it's going to lead to an extinction level stuff if he doesn't get control of everything, and Immortus is going to help him. But Larry knows first and foremost, like, I know a devil's bargain when I hear it, so we can find a way around it, because obviously he wasn't there to hear the whole conversation about Immortus and their immortality and stuff, and that's why Mr. 104 is doing this. He isn't doing this for bad guy reasons. He's like, he probably wants, his powers have become like, well, they're a ticking time bomb, but also they've always been a bad thing for him. It's like, you know, and they're tied to such terrible moments in his life and Larry's life. But Keek finally returns to Larry and is like, all right, we'll handle this together. We'll find a way that doesn't involve violence or making a bargain to try and save you from all of this, like having to make a deal with Immortus. And then Larry, like someone cuts open a like veil in reality and snatches Larry. Luckily, Mr. 104 goes after him, but I'm assuming that's another person working for Immortus having it. So, very, very interesting developments. I'm curious to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode, which should be the mid-season finale, I believe. I didn't know this going into it, but much like Titans, this is also, because I didn't know this about Titans either, but yeah, they're both hitting the halfway point of their seasons and they're stopping for a while. So next episode is going to be like the mid-season finale. I don't know if that has anything to correlate with, because of where DC is under James Gunn and Peter Safran, like whether the changes they're making, they're shifting and redoing like the back half of those seasons to incorporate the changes, or whether it's just like those seasons aren't done yet. I'm like, the fact is, they like the only other time they've ever done something like this, and that was Epics, and that was with Pennyworth. I mean, the CW stuff does it from time to time, but the HBO Max stuff hasn't done that until now. But like Pennyworth did it, but that was during the pandemic, so they didn't have the like second half of that season done. So it's interesting because Pennyworth didn't do that, but specifically Titans and Doom Patrol are. So, like I said, I can't help but think maybe it has something to do with everything going on with DC right now. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And like I said, where the first half of this season is ultimately going to end. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.